Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We drive on paved roads every single day, and we rarely stop to think about the generations of struggle, the massive engineering feats, or honestly, the sheer political will it took to create them. Today, we're unearthing the hidden history of one simple stretch of everyday infrastructure. We're looking at Missouri Route 33. That winding highway north of Liberty did not begin with automobiles. Before Missouri numbered it Route 33, portions of this corridor already served as county roads, linking Liberty with farms and settlements to the north. Travelers followed the landscape, avoiding difficult creek bottoms where they could. But rain could still turn Missouri soil into axle-deep mud. Conditions like these helped drive the good roads movement of the early 20th century. In 1922, Missouri incorporated the corridor into its new state highway system. Engineers graded it, bridged its streams, and changed portions of its alignment. But some older curves may still echo the road that came before. So when you drive Route 33 today, you're not necessarily following one untouched wagon trail, but you are traveling through a corridor shaped by nearly 2 centuries of movement. Now, the contrast between those two eras is absolutely fascinating. Think about it. Early travelers didn't conquer the landscape. They kind of just negotiated with it. They took the path of least resistance, winding around those difficult creek bottoms and steep hills. But modern engineers, they brought entirely new tools to the table. They graded the land, built massive bridges, and forced completely new direct alignments. But to really understand why these engineers had to step in so aggressively, we first need to look at just how bad things were. Which brings us to Section 1, Axle-Deep Mud and Missouri's Road Crisis. To really wrap our heads around this crisis, let's zoom out from the local farms for a second and look at the entire state of Missouri right at the turn of the 20th century. 110,000. That is the number of miles of dirt road across the state in the early 1900s. And out of those 110,000 miles, only about 5,000 were actually classified as improved. The rest were literally just dirt. So the crucial point here is that early road maintenance was, well, it was completely chaotic. These dirt roads were haphazardly maintained by local county governments and township overseers, and there was practically zero coordination. When it rained, that famous Missouri soil turned into a thick, sticky nightmare. We are talking quite literally axle-deep mud that could swallow a Model T whole. Vehicles would bog down completely. This created severe rural isolation and agonizingly slow travel times. Conditions like these drove citizens and those early automobile travelers to their absolute breaking point. They desperately needed a massive infrastructure shift. And that leads us to Section 2, the Good Roads Movement and the call for change. Out of all this muddy despair, a really powerful civic and political movement arose. People finally realized that economic prosperity and growth were intimately tied to having a reliable transportation network. And their rallying cry? It was simple but incredibly effective. Lift Missouri out of the mud. By 1920, the number of vehicles in the state was approaching 300,000, yet progress on the roads was just crawling at a snail's pace. So an intensive campaign was spearheaded for a massive $60 million state bond issue. And guess what? It worked. The bond issue passed in 1920, unifying the entire state around a massive financial commitment to completely overhaul their infrastructure. After that, the acceleration of progress was just staggering. Following some early cross-state pushes that kind of fizzled out around 1907, that 1920 bond issue finally broke the dam. That led directly to the Centennial Road Law in 1921. By 1922, the state highway system was officially incorporated, which, by the way, is exactly when our Route 33 corridor gets pulled into the state system. And then by 1926, we see the major highway renumbering that aligned Missouri with the new U.S. highway system. Let's move into Section 3, the 1922 highway system and the creation of a centralized network. So this centralized network stems from a pretty crucial legislative turning point. The Centennial Road Law of 1921 was an absolute landmark piece of legislation. Before this, remember, counties were in charge, which is what led to that disjointed, messy network we talked about earlier. Well, this law shifted highway building from the local level directly to a centralized state highway commission. It fundamentally and permanently changed road management in Missouri from a localized chore into a unified state-level engineering mission. And to put the scale of this into perspective, it was massive. The law explicitly defined 2 systems. They plotted out 1,500 miles of primary routes just to connect the principal cities with high-type, hard-surface roads. Then, they mapped out another 6,000 miles of secondary routes to connect the county seats with graded roads. Essentially, they took thousands of miles of chaotic wagon trails and organized the whole shebang into a highly structured, interconnected system. Now, it's also really important to note that Missouri wasn't doing this entirely in a vacuum. These ambitious state efforts were heavily aided by federal matching funds. The Federal Highway Act actually required states to have a highway department in order to even get these funds, which really helped establish a unified national standard over road building.
Okay, Section 4, Engineering the Modern Corridor, and specifically, engineering Route 33.
Let's zoom back in from that macro state history to the physical reality of our local corridor. When the Missouri State Highway Commission took over in 1922, they got right to work. They executed three major physical actions. First, they graded the road to create a level, reliable surface. Second, they bridged its streams, which meant no more getting bogged down in creek beds after a rainstorm. And third, they changed portions of its alignment to make the whole route way more efficient. Basically, they transformed a muddy, meandering wagon trail into a highly functional state highway.
And that 1922 engineering laid the exact groundwork for the modern Missouri Route 33 that we know today. It spans roughly 49.5 miles now. It begins at its southern terminus at US 69 down in Liberty and travels north through Kearney and Lathrop, all the way up to its northern terminus at Route 6 in Maysville. This road is literally the living physical legacy of the Good Roads movement.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, 2 Centuries of Movement, a Living Legacy. So, what does it actually mean to drive this road, or really any local state highway today? Well, as we established earlier, you aren't necessarily following one untouched wagon trail, but you are traveling through a corridor shaped by nearly 2 centuries of movement. Even though those 1920s engineers graded the hills and straightened out the lines, some of those older, sweeping curves on the road, they might still be echoing the pioneer wagons that came long before the engineers. The road is this beautiful hybrid of nature's original obstacles and humanity's modern solutions. Which leaves us with this final thought. Next time you take a curve on a country highway like Route 33, ask yourself, are you turning because a 1920s engineer decided it was the most efficient route? Or is your steering wheel echoing the exact path a pioneer's wagon took to avoid a muddy creek 2 centuries ago? The history of how we move is written directly into the pavement. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes open on the road ahead.